Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name is Stuart. I need an Outcast Wizard for my Renegade Crowns army, so I decided to make them an Astromancer as well. Let's take a look.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
Now, I'm working on a Renegade Crowns army. I need it finished for the end of the month for doubles at Warhammer World, for Old World, and I'm really excited to go, and I've got a few miniatures left to paint, and I need an Outcast Wizard. Didn't like any of the ones I already had. I want something new, and I quite like the idea of making them Cathay, and there's a real mix of sort of units within my Renegade Crowns, very mercenary, very Dogs of War-ish really, so I thought it'd be really fun. And I found a possible conversion that I wanted to try out, or kitbash, but also we can use this as an Astromancer when the rules come out in the next Arcane Journal, we think. It was looking at the picture of the new Astromancer that's on the way that made me think, well, there's some fun bits left over from building my Cathay army, including heads and pouches and things. I'm sure there's some bodies that could be built upon, and then browsing through the website I remembered the Luminarch kit and all the Celestial Hurricanum kits, and I wondered whether the bodies would work. I found one on eBay, ordered it, and here we are. The bits arrived from eBay, and it was a matter of swapping out the head mostly and then changing the star. So I went into my box of bits, in fact my leftover Cathay Grand Battalion bits. I found the head from the Longmire Rider, the bear head. I thought that would be perfect for the character, and the top of one of the artillery crew, I think is the bit that actually lights the cannon, and it fits perfectly on the end of the staff. So I thought it would be maybe a more oriental themed, Cathay themed top to that staff rather than the Empire. And then I had to trim off a couple of little bits of sort of Sigmar-y type symbols that were on the clothing, but it's hardly anything there. It was very easy to sort of cut them away with a knife, file them off, and then replace them with other little bits. So there's a little pouch there from one of the Jade Warriors, and I'm just gluing one of those little teapots on as well. And it's really, really easy to turn, I think, any miniature that's got fairly flowing robes with a head swap and a couple of those little accoutrements into something that looks pretty much like a Cathayan Outcast Wizard, or maybe an Astromancer if you want to kitbash your own rather than buying the new ones when they come out. I primed the miniature black, did a zenithal with the airbrush using white, and then dry brush to really pick out that detail. And the first thing I'm going to do is do a nice thin coat of skeleton horde contrast paint. So I'm glazing it in really thin and evenly because I really want to sort of accentuate the shadow that's already there with the zenithal underpainting, and also make sure that those lighter areas are showing through as well. So I want a really nice smooth coat, so if there are any areas I don't want to go on and do further highlighting on, which I will anyway, they still look pretty good as it is, and it's a method I use all the time. I paint like this all the time as well. If you've got a really good quality underpaint going on, you can get an awful lot from your contrast paints in this way. You don't just have to slap them on thick onto white paint. I'm moving on to Frostheart here, and I won't mention all of the colours probably in this video. I'm just talking you through how I painted one of my miniatures, so it's a bit of a loose tutorial. But I'm using the Frostheart here, a little like I did in some of the High Alpha videos I did as well, working with that almost white underpaint, glazing it on really thin and then taking it back away off the flat top surfaces. And I want a really nice sort of icy blue here, to go from blue in the recesses right up to almost white for all the flowing robes. And the best way I can achieve that is by gently glazing in to all of the recesses and then wet blending and feathering out, and just keep repeating that process. And then later on I'll go back and highlight and then reglaze again. In the end, we should end up with this really, really nice, smooth finish on the white, or relatively smooth. This is still a tabletop miniature. I'm not trying to win any painting awards for it, but I want to make it a little above standard rank and file here. So a nice tabletop character. If there's any paints I don't mention, don't worry, you can always pause them, because I'll be holding them all up to camera, so you can pause the screen and take a note of what they are. But I'll also put them up as a list on my Patreon not long after this video goes out. It is available for free patrons. You do have to sign up to patron in order to get it, but you don't actually have to pay anything. So if you want a nice handy list with all the paints on, there's a way you can do it, and there'll be a photo with it as well that sort of shows them all lined up. I'm actually using a little bit of a darker blue here. This is Talisar blue. It goes in such a small area. I nearly just edited it out of the video, but I wanted to show you pretty much everything that I do. So it's just, there's a little undergarment, and I decided just to make that a darker blue. So it shows a little bit around the feet, and there's a few little areas just poking out near the elbows on both arms of the miniature. I wanted a reddish brown, almost auburn hair, something a little bit different. I don't normally paint hair in this colour, so I thought I'd go for, I think it was dusk red in this case. And I'm using the Army Painter rubber palette. I bought it, it's not something they've given me, but I've started using rubber palettes with contrast paints, and they're really, really easy to clean. As soon as the paint's dry, you can just sort of push it up the other way and peel it away. Really good. But yeah, this paint goes on pretty smoothly, nicely into the recess. And again, I'm trying to make a really nice smooth coat here, so you don't have some of that tide marking that you can get if you apply your contrast paints too thickly. I want a nice smooth finish because it makes it a lot easier to go back and work on top of it, and you just have to do a little bit less work afterwards. A lot of the colours now are just a small area, so I'm using quite a light orangey brown here just to pick out the little sort of coin bag that's hanging on the belt, and I use the same colour on the shoes as well, again just to sort of pick out little things. A black here just to pick out a little bit of the strapping that's tying some of these things to her belt. And then I grabbed the same black, but also a couple of purples, and I'm going to work on the crystal ball type thing that she's holding, but there's also a gemstone on the belt. Now I carved away the old Sigmar symbol and actually placed a ball or half a ball cut off on there to actually make it look like a gemstone area, and I'm working from black up towards the top here. Again, this is all underpainted and just wet blending into the purples as well. I'm just trying to give myself a base to work on. I wanted to look a little bit like a sort of starry sky whirling vortex style effect, and that will come more apparent in a moment. For that, I'm starting off with a really, really bright yellow. I'm just doing some little squiggly lines and some little dots. Quite often those squiggly lines are coming out from those dots, are emanating from those dots. I must admit, when I started to do this, I only had a loose idea of what I wanted it to look like, but I thought I'd just go for it anyway. This is me painting something for my own army, which is slightly different sometimes when I just sit down to knowing I'm going to be doing a full tutorial. My processes are a little bit different. I paint things in slightly different orders because I'm just painting for me really, but it's nice to sort of share that with you guys on the channel as well. I added a few little dots of white as well, extra stars in the sky and in the centre of some of those yellow dots to give it a little bit more variation. Then after that, I've returned to glazing over the top. This time I'm using a pink, a much brighter colour. I really wanted to sort of change the tonal qualities at the top. And even though it's lighter, when you're painting with glazes like this, you can affect even the darker colours as well if you build up enough thin layers. But this just nicely glazes over all of those yellow marks, all of those little white marks, and actually makes it look good because it looks a little bit scruffy up to that point. So it tones it all down, and I think at this stage just starts to look really cool and looks like that vortex is within the globe rather than painted on the top of it. And then the final touch is just to paint on a little bit of gloss varnish to give that ball a real shine, and I do the same for that little gem that's embedded in the waist as well. And again, I just think it looks pretty cool, nice little focus point of the miniature. So I'm using an off-white here and a pure white, and these will form most of the highlights on all of the cloth areas on the miniature now. So you've got that sort of bonish colour cloth, and you've got the white and blue as well, and these two paints will pretty much do it all. I will use some other contrast paints again just to sort of glaze back, but I'm just thinning them on the wet palette and slowly going around and doing standard layering highlighting, but then wet blending out a little bit, feathering out a little bit to make them a little bit smoother than I might do on a rank and file miniature, keeping those paints that tiny bit thinner, but nothing wildly different if I'm honest. This is one of those things that the smoother I want to make it, the more time I will put into it, and there's a little bit of a balance here, but between producing something that's for an army that's coming up soon and I need soon, to being able to take my time and make it really, really, really smooth. And I think you can see already that the miniature is cool, but it's not going to win any awards. So I'm trying to go somewhere in the middle here with the quality of my highlights and the smoothness of them. Again, it's nice to work all the way through from that sort of bonish, off-whitish colour up to white in some very, very top areas, and try to keep it relatively smooth. For that icy blue cloak, I am adding a little bit of that Frostheart contrast back onto my palette with that same white. And first of all, I just add a little bit of white to the contrast paint. It gives you a very, very thin paint, as you can imagine, but it's perfect to start working between the highlights. And there's just a lot of adjusting going on here. So I will reapply the pure Frostheart right into the recesses and blend out, mix in with that sort of 50-50 with the white paint, and then also add the white paint to the very, very top highlights, very, very thin, and wet blend together, and then readjust, and then add a little bit more glaze back in, and playing around with it a lot until I was happy with the transitions in most of the places. This is probably the most consuming part, the time consuming part of the whole miniature, just because I knew it was relatively striking and I wanted to make it look nice. Are there lots of mistakes? Yeah, loads. There's loads of sort of slightly messy bits, whether it's not as smooth as it could be, for sure. But I knew it could also be pretty eye-catching as well, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't completely mess it up and it wasn't too terrible. When I got to the end, I made a very thin glaze using that Frostheart contrast paint on my wet palette, because it was very temporarily on there, and I had a question in my Discord recently about that. Do I ever add them to wet palette? Is it worth it? Most of the time, no, but occasionally I will. If I know I'm going to use the paint straight away and I know I want it thinned, then it's convenient for me to add it onto the wet palette, but you give it a few minutes and it will be too thin and you've lost control of it. But I just made a glaze and I'm just covering over the whole area. Kind of mid-orangey browns here that I'm using on the feet and on that little pouch. So basically I'm highlighting where I added the speed paint earlier on for that little pouch. Just simple layering highlighting and not spending an awful lot of time on this at all. I've also kept the highlighting of the hair quite simple as well. We've got that contrast paint down under the underpainting, so there's already a little bit of highlighting showing up where those sort of raised strands are. So I'm just trying to accentuate those raised strands here with a little bit of this colour, this sort of reddish brown colour. Thinned it a little bit. Afterwards I do go back and then re-glaze again. It just helps tidy up your paint strokes, so if you make a little mistake you can paint back in with the same contrast colour and then do a little glaze over the top, and it just smooths it all out, and it definitely helped this look a little bit neater. I'm using the whole warm skin tones flexible triad here. I've just put it in a line on my wet palette to work on the skin. At the time I put it on the palette, I wasn't sure whether I was going to be using every single colour, but it's one that I've not used quite as much. I've been testing the paints recently and I'm quite enjoying them. They're pretty good, especially the flesh tones. I think that they're quite nice, and I like the way they're all in one set for you there. It's really, really helpful. You don't need to use them all, but because it was a character, I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and highlight up from the darkest colour and see what it looks like, see if it comes out quite nice and smooth. And yeah, it's not too bad at all. There were stages in there I probably could have avoided for sure. But the paints are pretty good. They're pretty robust. They thin quite nicely on the wet palette. I didn't have any trouble at all, and you get a really, really nice range from dark to top, as you'd expect with 6 paints in a box, to be fair. So I definitely recommend giving them a go if you're looking for a set of flesh colours that you want to be able to work from. They're really nice the way they're marketed in those sets. It's really good if you're not sure which colours to buy together. Makes it easy for consumers. I think they were pretty cool. I purchased those myself, by the way. I have been sent some other stuff from Army Painter, but I liked them enough that I wanted to try these more. I thought it was pretty cool. The final layer, it really is just little dots because it's very, very light and very, very whitish. But at that stage, that's all you need anyway. You can always go back and adjust if you want to. I'd already did the eyes relatively early in. I like to do it once I've got the base coat down, really, because if you mess up, then you can paint in around the eye and reshape it rather than doing a perfect skin, doing your eyes afterwards, messing up, putting a pupil on a cheek or something like that, and then it's quite frustrating. Regulars to the channel will have seen these quite a lot, Vulpes Pink and Shyish Purple, and I like to use them on my skin afterwards as glazes. The purplish colour I
tend to paint in the recesses where the skin meets something else. So it's usually a cuff or the edge of the clothing where it will be shadowed and dark, and it just sort of neatens it up. It's a bit like black lining, but using a colour that works better. With the skin, it isn't quite so stark. And then the Vulpes pink, I do thin quite a bit because it's quite strong, into a very, very light glaze. Put it on the backs of the hands, let it run into the sort of the recesses across the knuckles, and then on the bottom third of the face as well. It just has a little bit of warmth around the lips and nose and things. If you go too thick though, it'll look like they've been stuck in the sun for too long. Metallic, there's not a lot on here. I'm going to paint the staff of this magician's staff here, a sort of silverish colour, and then the rest of it all gold. So I've just got a sort of standard dark steel and then a brighter steel. I think that's like a mithril colour from Army Painter in this example. For the gold areas, I decided to give them a nice deep bronze base. I quite often do this for steels as well, but I don't know why I didn't this time. I just decided I wanted to look a little bit cleaner and brighter, rather than a slightly sort of grim metallic. But this covered all the rest of the remaining metallic that's on the miniatures. You've got the little kettle there, you've got the top of that staff, there's a little hairband, there's a little bit on the belt. Then after that, I got a little triad of copper and gold colours to go over the top. And again, it's sort of standard layering style painting where I'm leaving a little bit of each previous colour still showing. So you get a little bit of transition, and it's very easy to do with metallic paints. The bulk of the work was done with that really dark bronze to start with. And then the next layer, which I believe was a copper, which gives you a nice sort of orangey colour, which you can leave more dominant on something like the kettle, but I focused a little bit more on gold on some of the sort of shinier areas. It's all the same colours after all, but depending on how much you use of different areas, you can sort of give it a slightly different impact to the miniature. But layering up there through those colours, knowing that it's sort of adding a little bit extra shine and sparkle to the miniature, and she looks fairly regal. I think. Well, I haven't made a story up for her yet, but we'll say that she's had some money at some point, or stolen it. I'm using a ready mixed oil wash here. This is grease from Scale Colours Soilworks range. I'm just using it like a standard wash, but it runs into the recesses quite nicely, and you can remove it from the flat surfaces afterwards, so you don't have to repaint back over with your metallic paints. And I'm really only adding it here to where the metals are, nowhere else. And this is the stage where I just get a little bit of Artist White Spirit just to take it off those flat areas and give that shine back. I did say I used it nowhere else. I used a little bit on the basing, which I've not showed you in full effect here because it's very similar in a lot of my videos. I would include them in the paints list, but I'm not talking you through all the stuff I did with the basing. I mean, this is the final sort of stages now when I'm adding a little bit of pigment, and then I go on and add some 2mm tufts as well. But again, all of those things will be in the paint list that goes up on the Patreon. Just added a final few touches where little splatters of mud on the bottom of the cloak always looks nice when you've got something so pristine and clean, to make it a little bit more acceptable to its environment. If she's walking through mud, there's going to be a little bit of splatter. I don't want to ruin all the nice work I've done, but also just a little bit to make it look more realistic. But that's it now, really. It's time to paint the edge on my base, and then we can start looking at some pictures of her all finished. I'm really happy with the way she's come out, not just the miniature, which was an incredibly simple kit bash, basically a head swap and a top of a staff swap and a couple of little bits shaved off that had symbols from Sigmar on, and a couple of bits of Cathay chucked on. It just goes how simple. Plenty of them are available on eBay as well when I last looked, so people might be going out there and decided to make their own Astromancers ready for the next Cathay release whenever that turns up, and she may well find herself being used for my Renegade Crowns and maybe in my Cathay list as well, because I think she fits. She's obviously not quite as grand as the new miniature looking at it in the pictures, but I think she definitely fits in well enough for me to use her as a second one. So I think that's pretty cool. Let me know what you think about it as a kit bash. Can you think of any other miniatures that would be a really nice base to work from, and add some Cathay heads and some little bits here and there that would work? Maybe even just the standard Wizards kit from Empire. There's probably some bases that you could use those as well. It's always fun kit bashing and things like that, but I'm happy with the paint job as well, the way it came out. It will do the job. As I say, not going to win any awards, but definitely stands out enough as a character. There's enough of a tie over with my paint job for my Cathay army. It works, and she works very nicely with my Renegade Crowns army as well.
Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. It's always fun when I can do a hobby-based video that's also leading towards a painting deadline I have for myself as well. And it's nice that for those of you who are here just to sort of follow the journey and see my finished armies and things, then this is part of that. Those of you that are here because you want painting tips and stuff like that, when you've got some of that in this video as well. So if you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment. It really helps the video be seen by other people. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Head over to the Discord and join. It's a great place for fun chat. And if you want to support me a little further, then please check out my Patreon, because it's the very best way of supporting me to keep making videos like this. There's loads of tiers on there, some that include extra tuition and tips and coaching and things as well, if you'd like that. Please also check out the channel sponsor Counterattack Bases. There's a link for them in the video description as well. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.